All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I am your host, Dimitra Theophanis, and welcome to another edition of Fired Up, the Art Alliance for Contemporary Glass education series on glass art. Just a reminder that this series is free and open to the public. So if you know anyone that is interested in glass or passionate about glass, please be sure to share our programming with them because they are welcome to join at no cost, and we would love to have them. Today, we are very excited to have Thomas Scoon with us. He is a cast glass artist that combines his material with stone in a very interesting process. I also want to thank Mary Childs for joining us and for connecting us with Thomas. So welcome, Mary Childs of Duncan McClellan Gallery. I think that is it for introductions. If we have any questions as we go along, please go ahead and put them in the chat room and I will get to those as we are able. Otherwise, I think that Thomas, you can go ahead and take it away. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Welcome to my studio. We are in Northwood, New Hampshire right now, which is southeastern New Hampshire, about an hour and a half away from Boston. To the east is Portsmouth, a half an hour, beautiful seacoast town. And to the west, a half an hour is Concord, our capital. Maybe some of you know University of New Hampshire, it's only like 20 minutes away. So I'm located in the middle of both of those. I have a beautiful 2-acre piece of property with a timber frame house, a photography studio. My studio here is about 4,000 square feet and back up to a beaver pond that I have a cabin on. So I really live in this amazing environment that it's all in one. And with our last year and a half, 2 years, really just kind of my life carried on. I work by myself. I really don't have assistants. So I get my material in, create my work, and ship it literally all over the world. So I'm gonna give you a little background about myself. We'll have a quick demo downstairs of showing you how the work is made. Then we're gonna show a small video also that's gonna help you understand maybe more of the process that's hard to show with mold making and kilns. We'll do a tour of the basement where all the equipment is, and then come back upstairs, look at the rest of the studio, and then view some works and take questions and talk a little bit about the work. So I enrolled in Illinois State University, Bloomington Normal, in 1983 to 1988 under Joel Philip Myers, really known as a blowing program. I had no experience at all with blowing glass or working in glass at that point. I came from a ceramics background, like a lot of us, some stained glass. So got enrolled in the BFA program in Illinois. Worked for Joel, grinding and polishing his pieces, also on the hot team making his work. So started out as a blower from 83 to say 88, or I mean 85-ish. And I was always kind of moving more towards sculpture with my work. So actually, we have some archival pieces here. These are actually close to 35 years old. So here are some blown glass, figurative, tube type pieces, very abstract. And now that I've done 2 or 3 of these Zooms, it's made me look back at the work and realize how these early pieces are really very close to what I'm doing now. The abstract figure, that joining and grouping and making relationships out of them back in 1984. So then started moving more towards actual blown pieces with sand casted elements. So you can see they're starting to become almost stony or stone quality to them, putting these additions of sand casted elements on these blown figuratives. And then finally, somehow in central Illinois, which is basically cornfields, that I came across some stones. And here's one of the early stone and glass figurative pieces. I was making these bust type pieces and head pieces. And so here's kind of a progression from 83 to 84 to 1988. 88, I received my BFA, Bachelor's of Fine Arts, and moved to Boston, studied under Dan Daly and got an MFA at Massachusetts College of Fine Arts. So that was from 88 to 90. 90, 91, I was working for other artists, cabinet makers, just trying to make some money to start building a studio. 1991, I rented a studio on the Rhode Island line. Actually, I was commuting from Boston, the south side of Boston, down to the Rhode Island line, and had a friend who was the tech at RISD, Rhode Island School of Design. So we rented a 4,000 square foot space there and started building a studio and started exhibiting 1991 through 96. So I found this property in 1996 and have been here for 25 years. So that's kind of the general background of how I've gotten here. And it's been, you know, a journey ever since to carry on this vision, and with help and support of people like you, it carries on. So we're in this main area right here. A lot of pieces get put together here. Sandblast, I got a foam injection machine, so packing, crating, shipping. So that kind of general just assembling pieces and final finish, and shipping that happens in here and packing. So at this point, really most of the work is made in a grinding room in the basement where the heavy equipment is. So we're going to walk downstairs and I'll do a short demo on kind of how the pieces go together. So when I bought this building, the only way that you could come into the space was down through these stairs that we just came down. So the space is 35 feet by 35 feet with 10-foot ceilings. Water, power, heat, and floor drains were here. I meant to open the door up. So when I bought this place, this was all concrete, and basically cut a road in, dropped about 100 to 150 trees, excavated this area out and sawed the wall out, dropped the wall, so then you could drive in and actually have a usable space. So it's just an amazing space that I've built all this equipment and to make my work. So what happens with my pieces is, and as you'll see in the video, that I'll go find stones that have a essence of a figure, so either torso stones and heads. And what I'll do is, just a minute, I forgot my crayon. So what I'll do is find a shape and then, you know, kind of mark out an area where I would saw this torso stone on a diamond saw and create a torso stone. And this is how all the work is made. Everything is start from the torso stone. So here is a torso stone that has been sawed out. So make a notching system, saw the shoulder, drill a hole in the top for a pin for then the shoulder. So this is where everything starts here. So what I do is make up clay form. So as a mold maker, you're either working in clay or wax. And the clay is a positive or the wax is a positive. It gets invested in a plaster mold. You dig the clay out of the mold or you steam the wax out of the mold. So positive is the clay, invest in a mold, dig the clay out, you have a negative of that shape in the mold. You put that mold in a kiln, you put glass in it, fire glass into the mold, and it becomes back to the positive of that shape. So basically, what I'll start doing is make the clay and cut out an area. And I'll start fitting the clay, the stone. Get a sense of what's happening here. And this typically takes a couple of days. I'm always working in additions of 5, 6, 7, 8 pieces at once. So I'll have the whole table filled with clays, sawed 6 to 9 torso stones, and then start doing all this clay work and do the custom fitting. It's very important to me that they have an organic custom fit between the glass and the stone. And remove the clay. What I'll do is take small stones then and put in texturing or veining in through the piece And then I'll come back and texture all this clay with small stones to give the glass component the feel of stone. So do all this texturing on it. And when you invest this in the mold picks up that texture. So make 6, 7, or 8, they go in a kiln, you fire it out. It takes, depending on size, anywhere from 10 days to 3 weeks between the whole kiln coming up, casting the glass, slowly cool and anneal it so the glass doesn't crack. Let the kiln cool, open it up, break the mold apart. So it's a one-shot mold. Basically, you're making everything unique. So you make the mold, you break it apart, you can't use it again. And then hopefully everything comes out. So now we have that shape cast in glass. So there's diamond work and tooling, which will show upstairs a little bit. So now basically 2 to 3 weeks later, we're at this point here where they have the torso stone and the glass base. So the next component.
A moment, Thomas, just to clarify for everyone, I know some people are very familiar with casting, but we might have some new people on as well that are not quite as familiar. So I just wanted to kind of summarize real quick. What you're showing us there is that the clay part is actually used to form the plaster mold, and the plaster mold gets filled with glass, which then gets put in the kiln and heated up at very high temperatures for quite some time. Which then leads us to the piece of glass we see to the right of the clay in the same shape. And what you also showed us is how you're able to create that plaster mold by custom fitting it specifically to each stone so that it marries well when the two pieces are finally ready to be joined. Is that correct?
That is totally correct. Every piece is unique, and I always talk about this. Every sculpture is unique because every stone is unique. So I'm taking a unique stone, making a unique form, and then, as you say, invest it. Clay comes out, kiln, fire, and we'll see all this during the video. But yes, that is exactly the process of creating this glass element here.
All right, great. Thank you. Go ahead.
So with the clay, you always have a flat side, and that's you're digging that clay out through the bottom, and I utilize that to make the pieces stand. So basically now, I have these Westinghouse wax fryers here, and that you used to cook the turkeys in, and they're great because you can melt wax in them and then keep the wax at a workable temperature. So with the shoulders, you got to make it in wax because it's a 3-dimensional object. It's fitting the torso stone and it's fitting the head. So you can't, clays don't work in a wax state. So this wax is a malleable state right now. And basically then I fit it to the torso stone. Let that harden up a little bit. And then I'll start cutting away the wax to create the shape of the shoulder. And also we'll use the stones, texture the wax to give it the stone texture. So the hardest part of the work is obviously creating heads. And I've learned over 25 years of doing this, how to see a stone that can give me a head. They'll have a certain characteristic where they'll taper back, a certain shape for a neck. They have to work on 2 different levels. They have to work formally, as in sculptural, so size and scale to the piece. And then aesthetically, are they interesting and color match? So heads are very difficult to make. And I've learned over the years, I used to find them, and which was even harder. But now I've been able to see a stone and create a head out of it. We'll actually try to do that in a little bit. So here's a wax now that I've kind of created beforehand. There's pins for the shoulder, there's a pin for the head, and I've now fitted a head to this wax. So here we are now at the state. We'll do the texturing, and then this wax gets invested in a plaster mold also, but it's a different process. What happens is you have a reservoir here. This is a piece of styrofoam. You have wax screws coming off it. So basically what happens is this wax would get attached to these screws, and there'd be two of them on here, two shoulders, and you build a box around it, and you totally fill this box up with clay or with plaster, same as the other mold. We're going to see in the video a mold being made of a base, but not of the waxes, because it's just kind of the same process. So attach, box around it, totally gets encased in plaster. You flip the mold over and you remove this piece of styrofoam, and that's the area that will deliver the glass. So now it goes into the kiln, the mold upside down like this. We're putting glass in here, and it melts and it goes through the screw systems and fills this cavity up that's been, the wax is steamed out. So you put in a steamer, the steam heats the mold up, and the wax comes out of the screw system. So actually here is a here's a reservoir, waste reservoir from a casting. So the shoulders were attached to here. This was the reservoir. You can see where the screws are left off, and the shoulder was here. So saw this away, and then you have the shoulder in glass. So that's the process. And then this will take another 2 or 3 weeks or 2 weeks to create the shoulder, head, cast it out. So then, eventually, say anywhere, 2 to 3 months later, a whole group of pieces will come out of the kiln. There's other finish work that's happening, but that's really the process of the casting. Here are some raw ingots of glass. So you buy glass commercially. So here's a gold that I use. I try to use colors that really work organically with the stone. There's some blue also, blue ingots, and a ingot of crystal. So these are kind of the glasses that go into the reservoir or get broken up and put in the mold to fire into the pieces. So I think at this point, we can run the video, and that you'll have a better understanding of, the stones, me sawing them out. It runs pretty quick. It's pretty interesting. So why don't we take a moment and watch that? It's about 5 minutes or so.
Okay.
And then we'll carry on.
Great. So Howard is going to go ahead and run a short video for everyone. And just a reminder that if you have questions as we are going along, please put them in the chat and we will get to them during the presentation. Is your sound on, Howard? We are not hearing anything.
Yeah, my sound is on.
Okay, let's try it one more time, please.
Okay. You want me to stop the share and reshare?
No, just go ahead and try it one more time.
And I'll look for stones that speak to me. Stones that have a certain shape, size, tapering, a form to them, a cleft.
Can you hear it, Demetra?
The chin that I can pull out a torso stone or the shape of a head out of these stones. I'll bring them to my studio and I'll saw out a torso stone. The main focus of my work while creating my figure of sculptures is a continuity between the stone and glass parts. It's very important to me that the transitions between these parts are seamless and have a custom organic fit. I will also create organic veining through the pieces. I accomplish this by using small stones to texture the clay bases and wax shoulders. The clay and wax will pick up the natural texture from these stones. Once textured, the clay and wax parts are then invested in a mold. Either dig the clay out, steam the wax out, and you have a negative shape of that form in a plaster mold, and that texture is embodied in the mold. The molds are then loaded in a kiln and glass is added. The kiln is fired at 1650 degrees to melt the glass. The shoulders and head complete the sculpture. My abstract figurative pieces
are one of a kind, since each stone is unique, embodying its own characteristics and gestures. The figures have a sense of history and timelessness from the stone, but they're also contemporary. The cast glass acts as a translucent stone, making them cohesive. Most important, the glass gives my sculptures a sense of soul. When the pieces are paired or grouped, interpersonal relationships are formed. Conversations occur between them, and I hope that the viewer also.
Great, thank you, Howard. One thing I want to point out is, we all are familiar with glass being such a tricky material to work with, but I think a lot of times what maybe isn't quite as clear is that just even finding the right stone to complete a piece of art is so time consuming, whether it's as a base for a piece, or in this case, as an actual custom element that is incorporated into the piece itself. Just finding the right stone for that is actually a considerably time-consuming part of the process. And we did have a question from someone, Thomas, that was wondering if the stones are found on your property or brought to your property. And you're actually muted, so if you can unmute before answering, there we go.
Yes, there's, New Hampshire is the granite state. So I go out to either construction sites, farms, quarries, and find stones. And then I bring them in. I'll put them on a pallet. I have a bobcat. I pull it off my truck with my bobcat, and I have pallets all over the property here of stone. So it's become very difficult to find stone and find, this type of stone with the great color, a lot of feldspar and mica that happens in these pieces. Fortunately, I found an old New Hampshire guy a couple hours away. Quarries have become very difficult to get into for liability issues, people getting hurt. So in the video, I mean, this is, like quarter mile or it's a mile area that he blasts, and he palletizes it and sells it as landscaping stone. And fortunately, I've become friends with him, and he'll let me come in. He's really kind of cut back on people coming into his quarry and pick rocks. So that's a, kind of a somewhat fun but brutal day. I go out and walk in the quarry and picking up 1,500, 2,000 pounds of stone and put it in the truck, bring it back. And out of that pallet of stone, there could be 100, 200 pieces, and I might use a third of those. And then the rest just, goes into stone walls or fill or whatever. So yes, I find it and bring it in.
And it looks like in the video, we also saw that after you found the stone, you're also doing some additional carving into it with the saw once you bring it back to the studio.
Correct. That's, I find the shapes that I respond to, and then I manipulate them. It's very important that my hand is really not seen in this process. I guess I was going to talk a little bit about this upstairs, when we're looking at the work, but, I feel that I work with nature in a sense that, the glass, the stones are really the characteristics of the piece. The glass, completes the sculpture. And as I was talking about the spiritual essence, I mean, what the glass gives it to. But I almost feel like I find the stone, I do a very slight manipulation that, isn't natural, but looks natural. And I give that stone then a new context. I've changed it slightly, and now it has a new identity.
Wonderful. We also had a couple people wondering, where do you get your glass and what type of glass do you use?
Commercial glass is very difficult now. It's incredibly expensive. Fortunately, the gold I was able, Steve Weinberg retired, and he had, thousands and thousands of pounds of glass in Rhode Island. A lot of it wasn't really my color, but the gold I was able to test, and it worked out. So I bought every bit of the gold from him. The blue glass, actually came from a GTE plant, a light bulb plant in Rhode Island, through my friend who I had the studio with. So right now that studio, it was the plant was like a city block long, and it was there for like 150 years, and they made light bulbs. And we could go in and get a hopper full of glass, 2,000-3,000 pounds of glass. They would just give it to us, but it was a frit. And I brought it back to my studio. I built a casting furnace, a day tank. I do not have that anymore. And so for 15, 20 years, I was able to go get hoppers of glass and then throw it in the furnace, make ingots. And then you turn the furnace off, you use the ingots. They ended up closing. I bought a tractor trailer, a 45-foot tractor trailer, and I filled the whole bottom with glass. I probably got 40,000 pounds of cullet from them, melted it in the furnace and made ingots. And so that glass is no longer available, the blue. I have probably enough for 5 more years of pieces. The crystal, I just, there's a factory in Czechoslovakia. So the last couple months I've been dealing with trying to get customs import. And I just bought 1,000 pounds of glass from Banis Glass in Czechoslovakia. So that is being shipped over, and with all our shipping issues, the shipping will probably be costing as much as the glass. So that's a new source that I know a lot of people around the world are using. And so that is right now what I do and use for glass.
Great. All right. We have a few more questions, but I think for now we'll go ahead and have you continue on, and then I'll stop you again in a little bit.
Okay, we're gonna just take a look at the rest of the studio down here, just give you a sense. I do have a bronze casting furnace. So it's very unique to have a bronze furnace. So bronze casting and glass casting are very similar. You're making waxes, you're investing the waxes in a mold, you're burning the wax out, and then this furnace holds 100 pounds of bronze, poured bronze right here. So it's another aspect of my work with the wall mounted pieces that I make. I build all my own kilns and equipment. So you can buy these commercially, incredibly expensive. So, a couple $1,000s and 2 or 3 weeks of work, and you can build a custom kiln. So here's a kiln. So typically you cannot really look in kilns too often, either when you're loading the kiln, you're casting the glass, or when the molds are then cool. But when they're annealing, you can't open your kiln or the piece could crack. So here are 2 lost wax castings of a seated figure. The thighs are in here. I thought I'd just leave this up and show you that the molds are here. Reservoir, there was probably about 40 to 50 pounds of glass in each reservoir. Bring this kiln up over 24 hours from 0 to 1,000. And then from 1,000 to 1,650, that takes another 10 or 12 hours just to get to 1,650. And then this kiln's at 1,650, the high point for 12 to 14 hours. And then you turn it off and tell it to go to 1,000 degrees. And then it slowly cools from 1,000 to 0. And that kind of cycle is like a 350-hour cycle. So this is almost a full month. And glass artists are not very eco-friendly. We use a lot of electricity. And so this is a kiln. So I'll be opening these molds up and, pulling these parts out. But I thought I'd wait so you can just see some molds in a kiln.
And as you were showing us the process, Thomas, there's a couple of terms that you're using that I just wanted to kind of briefly define for our group, if people are not familiar. You mentioned a few times that you're investing the wax in the mold, and for most of us, we think of Apple and Microsoft and the stock market when we hear investing. So maybe you can just define that real quick for everyone.
Yeah, when you saw me making the plaster mold in the box, that's what that process is called. It's you're investing an object in a plaster mold. So it gets invested, and that plaster really hardens very quickly. So once you start mixing that plaster and you pour that into the box or invest into that box, that plaster will harden in a matter of 3 or 4 minutes. So if you're you have to be aware of a lot of issues and have a very good mold or a structure around it. so that plaster can stay in there. I mean, a mold like this is like 3 to 4 or 5 gallon buckets of plaster. So that 5 gallon of plaster probably weighs like 60 pounds at least. So, you know, you have to have a sturdy structure around that object to hold all that plaster.
Great, thank you.
Contraption I built, this is basically a steamer. You have air tank and water heater element in here and 220 power, and you fill it up with water and basically it generates steam. So there's a pan in there that the wax will drop into, and it's a way of steaming wax out. Wax can be very difficult to get out of molds. You put them in kilns, then the molds dry out, and it's very complex, but here's this crazy contraption that I built. A front loader, I don't think I put any glass in here. So basically, since my molds can't hold all the glass initially, I got to add glass, and it's a process of every 20 minutes. I gear up in a hot suit and take a chunk of glass out, come here, kiln's at 1650, open the kiln up, drop some in the mold, close it, come back in a half an hour, 20 minutes, open it again. And you're adding 2 or 3 pounds at a time, or 4 or 5, depending on how big that mold is. So the issue is you can't take a cold piece of glass, room temperature, and put it in a hot kiln or explode. So this kiln here is, this will all be filled with ingots of glass or broken pieces of glass. This kiln's at 1,000 degrees temperature, so it's kind of preheating the glass to go into the kiln at 1,650 degrees. Finally, the dirty mold room here. So plastered silica. This is where the investing happens. Mold makers will probably die of silicosis, unfortunately, but I have floor drains. I really try to keep the studio very clean. I wash the studio, once a week to try to eliminate the amount of silica dust that happens from mold making. Diamond saw, there's 2 different ones. So this is more of a diamond saw to do glass work. There's one upstairs for stone work. And then there's metal welding over here. So this is kind of, the actual working aspect of the studio. We'll go upstairs if everybody's ready.
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and go upstairs? Thank you.
So now we're in the other half of the studio. When I bought this place, they actually raised German Shepherds here, and this was a kennel. So they had 3 kennel runs that dogs do outside, and it's amazing that this place has a fiberglass floor with floor drains also. So this is basically a dirty grinding room, and in theory it can be cleaned. This one's a little tougher for me to deal with. So what happens is I'll bring the pieces up here and do the grinding and the stage of fitting everything in. So Gus, you want to come in for a minute? So here's a piece right now, another crystal piece that basically came out of the kiln. And as you can see right now, it's kind of tippy. So what I did was saw the base on a diamond saw, and you try to get it as straight as possible. But since there's no flat or square edge, it's always a guesswork. So, and then when they come out of the kiln, there's all kinds of flashing. So you got to use air tool, diamond tools, and water feed to grind all this area out, so the stone can come back in and fit. So it's this process of the clay, invest, cast out. Then there's flashing in here, or things that happen in the process that changes that area. Come back, grind, saw. So here's a big lapping wheel. So what happens is this is spinning around and around and around really fast. And there's a grip coming down here. So this grinds, then you grind the base to try to get this to stand straight. You come back and forth. So that'll take, half an hour, 45 minutes sometimes to get a base to stand correctly. A water feed to drill holes in glass and stone. And then another diamond saw. This one's more for stone working over here, that diamond saw.
And when you're attaching the stone and the glass together, are you using an adhesive or are you just using the that fitting mechanism with the peg that you showed us?
Yeah, basically it's the notching of the base has this whole notching system that gets designed. So that will lock the torso stone into the base. And then the holes that pin the shoulder and head are pinned together. So it's a notching system and then a pinning system. And on final installs, do suggest spot siliconing on the back or on the base that either can be pulled up on, and fine homes.
Okay.
So there's one more space. So this is kind of my winter working area. Wood stove is in here, and a lot of wax work is happening here, clay work, assembling pieces, wall pieces, for bronzes. So, here's a group that just came out. Bases have been sawed, hasn't been ground yet. Shoulders still need to be sawed, pinned, wax work, and create the heads. Here's a wax blank of some seated figures. So master molds that you make the thighs or legs, individually. That's just kind of a blank, and then fit each stone to the custom stone to each base or legs or thighs. So I've always worked on the wall. So I've made these wall mounted glass stone cast bronze pieces and twines or emergences. So these started from doing some long exposure black and white photography during the winter of the moon passing through the trees and stars, and started, visualizing my figures kind of up in the trees. So, actual tree branches you make a master mold of, and these are actual, would be wax tree branches, cast them in bronze, weld them all together, create the figures. Copper wire gets welded, and then glass gets used for the leaves. So it's these ideas of, my work is really about, family lineages, relationships, and it's an extension of that, the lineage of tree lineage, family lineage, our reliance on nature, this push and pull between the dynamics of figures and kind of growing together. So that's kind of these ideas behind these wall pieces. Here's actually a kind of an older, earlier piece, a seated figure that's titled Fractured. It was actually two stones that I was making to open up this torso stone or the chest, and half glass, half stone head. That really led to these generic pieces where then, wanting to create the space. So sawing out a opening in a torso stone, including the little figure. These kind of started when my son got born and kind of birth and rebirth. And then I started seeing them as, kind of your inner self. So that's kind of these generic pieces. I don't make many more large scale pieces, just physically the demands of them, the cost of the glass. So there are a few around. There's this pair here. There's a few out in some of the galleries, but really kind of gone to either the seated figures, 3/4 size and pedestal size figures at this point as working that I create.
And do you ever create work for public spaces, or is it primarily for private collections?
Yeah, basically for private collection. There are some in public, but not really public art that I haven't been able to cross over into that world.
And are the pieces able to be displayed outdoors, or are they for indoors only?
No, they're pretty much indoors. They get very dirty. They're pristine condition now. Some of the heat issues the glass has a hard time with, so I strongly encourage. There are pieces out, but at this point, I encourage them to stay inside. Okay. So we'll go back to the main room now. So, the seated figures have always been a signature type of piece. So I make the pedestal size seated figures and the larger scale. They're titled visionaries, typically the larger ones. The smaller ones are titled reflections. So yeah, move up. I guess you can go. So a beautiful pair here that's recently been finished. It's really that dynamic and that dialogue that happens between these two figures, and then us as viewers, how we can fall into that, conversation that's happening. And I think often people having my work, I've heard that they start having conversations with the pieces also. So as I spoke, it's really, they're very contemporary, but they do have a sense of history and timelessness from the stone. They are primal. They're enduring, but they are contemporary. They are of the here and now. So, the essence of that spiritual essence that happens with the pieces is really important, and that's coming from the glass. So we have a range of kind of smaller pedestal-sized crystals here, a single gold, some other smaller seeded, recently finished trio grouping in a blue that are just a sweet grouping. People ask about, smaller pieces. It's very difficult. So this piece over here is probably like 15 or 16 inches high, and it's very difficult to get much smaller than that because you're trying to create, formally the torso stone, the head, and once you get smaller than here, you just don't get any sense of the figure. Another Granite piece. This is my personal piece that I'm kind of hanging on to. The other piece would or is for sale. So as we talk about casting, these are some recent pieces that just got finished. So beautiful aqua pair, and then the crystal pair. So even after doing this for 25 years, and this is actually newer glass here. So we've created the wax, invested in a plaster mold, steamed it out, fired it, and then opened up the kiln. And so these pieces have these voids in the back of it. So sometimes what happens in castings, you'll get plaster in them. You can get bubbling or voids. The piece can crack. And when that happens is basically you try not to get too aggravated. You take it, you look at it, I throw it away just so I don't have to look at it, think about it. And then you go back and you basically remake that again. So it's always a bad day when something like this happens, but it's part of glassworking. It's just, there's a certain loss rate that happens. Fortunately for me, as long as I've been doing it, it doesn't happen a lot, but as you can see, it does happen. A pair of Voyagers over here. So I make these vessel pieces also. So it's kind of the idea of, the journey of life with a partner. It's filled with crushed glass that kind of feels like surf or more water. But then I also kind of see it as, these moments in life that, we go through together that holds us together. I mean, that's kind of a big metaphor, but that's kind of what I see in some of those pieces. So kind of touched on a lot of it. If there's more questions or.
Well, I just wanted to point out as well that Mary has put a link in the chat to the work that you have at Duncan McClellan Gallery.
Yeah, I actually was getting there. I wanted to thank Mary and Duncan. They're, one of the best for helping, facilitate this Zoom session. I have a foot in both the sculpture world or fine art world and glass world. So I'm represented by fine art galleries and glass galleries. So Duncan represents me in St. Pete's, Ken Saunders, Jim Shantz, Raven in Aspen, Montague in San Francisco, and am I forgetting somebody? I hope not. Oh, Sandra Ainsley. We can't forget Sandra Ainsley. She is one of the best and classiest women out there, and I love her dearly. So, people buy my work because it's glass oriented, but then this year, the sculpture galleries have been just insane. I've sold so much work this year. It's been an incredible year. So.
Great to hear. Do we have any more questions from our group? I think that we covered everything in the chat.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Thomas, your work is so inspiring and stimulating. I mean, I love it. How did you kind of get started, or was there a sculptor or artist, that really you felt the kinship with as you were starting
Well, I've always, arts have always been in my family as a child. So I've been exposed to arts as, a child growing up. And I was trying to figure out what to do in life in college, and you'd be in, a forestry program or computer. And I was always ended up hanging out in art departments and being in art departments. And just obviously being idealistic, you go down this road, and somehow, it's worked. I'm an idealist and a realist. How you think you can make a living at this, but then I kind of know what I need to do to, try to succeed. So I was exposed at Illinois State. There was a concrete sculptor who I was good friends with that kind of opened my eyes. An artist or a sculptor who I was early is John Buck, so Deborah Butterfield's husband. He does kind of abstract figurative pieces in wood and bronze. Then he kind of incorporates those with paintings. So he was kind of an early influence, kind of ideally, but I've always worked in the human figure and kind of interested in American Indian art, African art. So I think early days, there was a lot that was too blatant or relied on that a lot. And I've learned, it's like the simplicity of the human figure and this abstracting it, that what we are just our primal essence of the figure. So it's kind of a combination of all those things.
Wonderful.
So if anybody's interested, I guess if you have a working relationship with one of the galleries I mentioned, it's always best to, I know that you're a collector based out of, glass galleries. So, I encourage you to reach out to one of the galleries I mentioned. If there's something, specific, you can actually, get my email and email me, and I would direct you to one of them if there's something specific. So if you see something in the studio, and as I say, if you have a close working relationship with one of those galleries, please reach out to them.
And someone is asking, who is the person behind the camera?
Who is the person behind the camera? This is my partner, Gussie Wilson. We've been together 10 years. We are not married, but we are, committed to each other. So this is Gussie.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. Excellent job. Thank you so much for helping out today, Gussie.
My pleasure.
All right.
If there's any other questions, we can take them, or thank you very much.
I'm just going to go ahead and stop the recording and thank everyone for coming. But if people want to stay on and chat, you're welcome to do that.
Howard and Dimitri, thank you very much. It's been wonderful.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Thomas.